Well, hello. Welcome, everybody, to Skeptics in the Pub Online. We're very, very pleased that you're joining us this evening. So Skeptics in the Pub Online is a collaboration of all the different Skeptics in the Pub groups across the UK, pretty much. So we would normally be putting on interesting events and talks and various other kind of stuff on a monthly basis in our various cities all around the country. But because of the whole pandemic that I'm sure you've all heard of by now, we aren't able to do that. And so instead, we decided to all gather together and put on a weekly event, a weekly talk right here on Twitch every single week of the lockdown from the start of April 2020. And we've been doing that every single week. And we've had some fantastic and really interesting talks that if you're interested, if it's your first time and you want to find out a bit more about us, if you look at Skeptics in the Pub Online on YouTube, there's loads of really great talks there from across the last year. Make yourself comfortable, have a chat. You can see there's the chat on the side of the Twitch screen there. Feel free to chat amongst yourselves throughout the talk. You will notice occasionally there are some moderators. They've got a little sword next to their name. If you see anything in the chat that you're not comfortable with, that you think is something a bit rum, feel free to let one of the moderators know, and we'll take a look at that. But you know, everyone's pretty cool. Everyone has a lovely old time chatting in there. Occasionally, you'll also see some messages popping up from the moderators directing you to various points of interest. Like, for example, if you want to ask a question of our speaker, the moderators will be periodically sharing a link to sitp.online/ask, which will take you through to the system we've got set up where you can input your questions there. So feel free to go there at any time. That you'll see the link popping up now and then. But also go there to see which questions have been asked and upvote the ones that you like the best, because we'll take that into account when it comes to the Q&A in the second half. If you're also liking what we're doing generally and you want to support it, you can go to sitp.online/donate to make a small donation, the price of a pint, something like that. And it just helps us keep the roof above our heads and keep the internet turning away there, keep the bandwidth whirring. We'll be doing more of these talks for the foreseeable future that we're aware of. Certainly next week, for example, we've got a fantastic talk lined up. We've got Mariana Spring from the BBC. She's the BBC's first ever specialist disinformation expert and reporter, and she's going to be talking about her work reporting from the front line of conspiracy theory and talking to people who believe in quite extreme conspiracy theories and exactly what she's found out from spending a year looking at that, which I'm sure is going to be really, really fascinating. That's all the admin. We can now come to our event for this evening. We've got a really fantastic and interesting and exciting talk lined up for this evening that I'm really, really excited about and can't wait to see. And I'm going to hand over to our speaker now, in fact. So please, talking to us about communicating statistics to the media during a pandemic, please go wild in the chat with clapping emojis for our speaker this evening, Professor Sir David Spiegelhalter.
Thank you very much indeed for that kind introduction. And all I can say is, I've done a lot of gigs, Skeptics in the Pub gigs before in Cambridge and Lewis and other places, and they're always great fun. And so my big regret is I'm stuck here at home. Okay, I've got a drink, but it's not quite the same as being in the pub talking to real people. So I'm going to pretend there really are people out there, and I hope you're going to ask questions. I'm going to give a talk for about half an hour or so. That I think is about as much as anyone can take. And then I hope people will ask me questions, because that's what I'd much rather do, is just interact with everybody. Okay, so I'm going to move over to my slides, if that's okay. And I hope everyone can see those all right. And if they can, that's great. That's me. I should say my, conflict of interest perhaps is that during the pandemic, I was made a non-executive director of the UK Statistics Authority, which is the national body that oversees the work of the Office for National Statistics, which I'm going to be mentioning. So, when I say they're doing great work, well, I would say that, wouldn't I? And so, do take that into account. Okay, but I'm going to talk about communicating stats, because that's what I've been doing for much of this year. I mean, I used to be a proper statistician and do difficult sums and work on, AI, uncertainty in AI and Bayesian statistics and Markov chain Monte Carlo and all that kind of stuff. And that was great. It was a good career. But I was very lucky about, 13, 14 years ago. I got funded by a philanthropist, David Harding, with Winton Capital Management, a hedge fund manager, to shift work. And I became Winton Professor for the Public Understanding of Risk in Cambridge. And so that enabled me to really change my whole way of working. I moved into making documentaries, writing popular books. Well, almost popular books, slightly unpopular popular books. There's a special genre that I think I invented, and doing TV stuff. Here I am with Anandpur on CNN, and this is great, and I've really enjoyed it. But I was coming up to retirement, and I thought, I'm going to have a quiet time from now on. But I do now work with these fantastic group, and that our benefactor, David Harding, gave us some more money to set up a whole centre. And this is extraordinary. We're the Winton Centre for Risk and Evidence Communication. And these are lovely people. I'm the only statistician. All the rest are psychologists and communication professionals and web designers. We've got an actor, a vet, science communication experts. And that's what we do. And we've been incredibly busy during COVID. I could talk about more about that later if you want. But that's, in a way, they're doing the experimental work in psychology of communication. I've written one popular book, and this has actually been very popular during the pandemic. Nothing like a good pandemic to sell stats books. And we're actually right in the middle of another one, COVID by Numbers, which we should be on the shelves later this year. Okay, so in this book, The Art of Statistics, which I do recommend, I make this point right at the beginning, and I think this is so fundamental. Data does not speak for itself. And I stole this idea really from Nate Silver, from his excellent book, The Signal and the Noise, where he's got this great quote: the numbers have no way of speaking for themselves. We speak for them. We imbue them with meaning. People love numbers and they spout numbers all the time, but they, as if these are cold, hard facts, somehow self-evident what they mean. Absolutely not. I can make any number look big, small, frightening, reassuring. The story, the context, the narrative are absolutely essential. I've come to appreciate this so much more. I used to think, you just have to get the numbers out there and everyone will say, thank you very much, thank you. No, the presentation and the narrative are incredibly important. So that's going to run through a lot of what I'm talking about how can we do non-manipulative communication, which I feel is very strong, very important. Okay, so numbers. That's today's numbers. Took that off the Public Health England rather excellent dashboard. It wasn't great at the start, but it's got really fantastic bit of data science now. The bringing in data from multiple sources. 4:00 is updated, masses of people watching it. It's a really, really nice piece of work. Of course, everyone would want it done differently and new things put in, but really they're doing a great bit of work. So, they record deaths, for example, within 28 days of a positive test by the date of death. That's the sort of official number. You can see it's down to very low levels now. We'll talk about that in a moment. But as I say, there's at least 4 different definitions of the number of deaths from the pandemic circulating, and I use them all the time. Just move between them, which must be pretty confusing for audiences. They use 2 of the main ones: deaths within 28 days of a positive test, 127,000, but actually deaths with COVID-19 on the death certificate from the Office for National Statistics, my gang, 150,000. And the one on the right is the reliable one, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. The one on the left is the daily figure, chosen for convenience because it's one they can update every day. There's demand for news, the new number every day. Whereas the ONS one, since the correct one is 10 days old at least, is talking about what happened 2 weeks ago. Still fantastically efficient and up to date. Brilliant work. Of course, I would say that, wouldn't I? So let's look at the ONS figures. These came out on Tuesday. This is an amazing graph. You've given a whole lecture just on this graph, really. And if we look at this is just the number of deaths over the last year, or since the beginning of January 2020. The blue ones are the ones with COVID on the death certificate. Extraordinary. We can see the first wave shooting. The first and the second waves are coloured very differently. Notice the difference there. In the first wave, there's, which is 60,000 or so excess deaths, the black line being the 5-year average. There's a lot of green above the black line. So there are excess non-COVID deaths. This is, I think we can be very confident this is underdiagnosis of COVID. These are old people in care homes. They changed the rules so the doctors did not have to actually see the patient before they filled in the death certificate. They're reluctant to ascribe COVID when they've never even examined the patient, and certainly haven't tested them. And so I think everyone would agree that those green above the black line in the early part should in fact be blue. They would now be classified as blue. Let's look at the second wave, completely different picture. There's a lot of blue below the black dotted line. If you look on the left of the graph, you can see what's happened just over the last few weeks. And that shows the green, remember, are non-COVID deaths. They've been running through the whole winter well below the normal average. Non-COVID deaths are now running at historical low levels. And now even all deaths are running at historically low, incredibly low levels. There's very few people dying in the country at the moment compared to what we would expect. And that's quite an interesting story, that so few people are dying at the moment in the country. Why? Again, the whole point about stats is that it doesn't tell you the answer. It just generates more questions. So why? Let's think of the first thing people usually say, these are people, the blue are people, they're being labeled as COVID, they'd have died anyway. Well, some would have, but at the peak of the epidemic, around 10% of COVID deaths that have COVID on the death certificate are labeled as just dying with COVID. Essentially, it wasn't as an underlying cause at all, but 90% are. Interestingly, at times last summer and now, when there's very few COVID deaths, a quarter of deaths are only labelled as being are labelled as being with COVID rather than from COVID. So a much higher proportion of people now who are being labelled as COVID deaths actually aren't dying because of COVID. They're dying with COVID. They just happen to have the infection. And again, there's a whole lot of reasons for that. Because the other thing that happened in the summer and is happening now is that the COVID that people are getting is much weaker than the normal COVID. The tests are coming back. You have to do a lot more effort to find out positive tests. So not only is there less virus circulating, it actually hits people a lot weaker. So all sorts of things going on here. Okay, why else then? Why is it so low? Okay, let's look at flu. I think this is an extraordinary graph. This just shows that people, the numbers of people going to their GPs with what's called influenza-like illness, so complaining of influenza-like symptoms. Okay, the pale dash line is 2010, big flu season, tens of thousands of people dying, incredibly high. The other dash line, 2019, last year before, which was getting quite a nasty flu season. This year, can you see it? Can you see it? Nobody is reporting flu symptoms to their GP over the whole of the winter. No flu. This is below baseline. This is below I think this is probably lower than ever been seen before. There's no flu. And this is a lovely graph. So this shows hospital admissions. So the green line is people being admitted for COVID over the second wave. And the red line is people being admitted for flu. It's just it's nothing. No one's going to hospital with flu. So normally flu each year will kill somewhere between 7 and 30,000, 30,000 people a year, average around 17,000. Nothing this year. So we're saving that many lives because of all the actions we're taking. Flu, we know the R number for SARS-CoV-2 is about 3, probably about 4 now, with the Kent variant dominating, raises R to probably about 4, really nasty, infectious at the moment. Flu is pathetic. It's about 1.3, 1.4, it's our number. So all the measures that we're taking that are sufficient to stop COVID, stop the SARS-CoV-2 circulating, just wipe flu off the map. And this was completely predictable from what happened in Australia, Chile, and South Africa in their winter. In their winter last summer. So no flu, and that's saving huge numbers of lives. So of course, what it shows is that maybe if we social distance all the time in winter a bit more, we could save a huge number of lives. Okay, let's drill down a bit. I think this is quite interesting. This shows where people are dying. I think this is something that's received some attention, but I think it really should have received more attention. So this is excess deaths over the 5-year average. in different places. People dying in hospital, in care homes, and in homes. And we see this big spike in the first wave. In care homes, really awful. Look at care homes, a massive number of deaths. In the second wave, hugely more protected. You know, a complete difference of what happened in care. And the point is that this takes no notice of what's on the death certificate. There's no, it doesn't matter whether someone put COVID or not. This is just counting the bodies, to put it really crudely. Now, a deficit of deaths, remember, the deaths are at a record low in hospitals and care homes, still excess deaths at home. And look at that pattern at homes. It's never changed. Through the summer, when there was very little virus around, whole time, there's been a systematic change in the pattern of people dying in this country, with at least 25, 30% more people dying at home than used to. Now, that's quite an interesting, I think it's a very interesting fact. It raises questions. Again, we go around that cycle. The stats just raises more questions. And, first of all, would these people have lived longer had they gone to hospital? And well, some might have, but there's actually, some would have, but there's a lot of, for example, cancer deaths happening at home that, that would have happened in hospital, but instead of happening at home. People prefer to die at home. Everyone would like to die at home most people would, if they could. So the crucial thing is not that this is necessarily a bad thing, but what's the quality of these deaths? What's the end-of-life care like? And that's what that question, that data generates. Data doesn't answer the question. Okay, so let me whip through now the rest of my talk. That's just a sort of summary of where we are at the moment, and I'm happy to try to answer any more questions on that later. But I know that the communication business. Okay, I've done quite a lot of media stuff. I think that the stats organizations have done a great job, and I would say that, wouldn't I, of course. But there's huge demand from people like me and others to get on the radio, get on the television, go and talk about the stuff. It just relentless for a year. And most of the people on stage don't want to do this, with, I think, quite good reason. So anybody who's willing to get up and talk, they want them. And journalists, I think, on the whole, have acted well. I've been stitched up a few times, but it hasn't been too bad. But I have had to learn basic business of just saying, I just don't know. I don't know. I mean, don't ask me. Don't ask me. Ask a modeler, ask a virologist, ask a public health expert, because you'll get up and you'll just get asked stuff you don't know about. And Kevin McConway and I, two statisticians, have done quite a lot of this media stuff. We've written a guide. It's freely downloadable. It's in Significance, so you can find it. And it just goes through all these lessons for statisticians, but in fact any sort of scientists who are appearing before the media. Just the warnings, because we have made every mistake and continue to do so. So, I mean, I won't go through all those, but just, beware of just a chat, because everything you say is being written down. Just the crucial thing is just stick to explaining. Try not to have your opinions. Don't mix those up. Just try to help people understand things. Sound human. I was like, we had to put that in, because you've got to trying to be quite personal. And the other thing, 13 say you'll get things wrong. It'll go wrong. You'll get stitched up, or you'll be stupid. You'll say the wrong thing. You'll use some loose language. People will criticize you. Don't get too concerned about it. I haven't had that much abuse. I'm a old white man, and so I've been protected from quite a lot of it. But if I do, I just block. No, I don't even block people on Twitter. I just mute them. I don't want to give people the pleasure of being blocked. I just mute them so they can jabber away and I don't hear them. Why listen if people are nasty? Okay, so through repeated, I'd just like to go through some of my mistakes. It's always a good laugh. The mistake is getting too much attention. I wrote an article a year ago on how does Britain compare with other countries, the dangers of league tables, saying you've got to be really careful. This was back in May. You've got to be really careful. And this got a lot of coverage. So Boris Johnson ended up quoting me in the Parliament, saying, oh, David Spiegelhalter says you shouldn't draw any international comparisons. And I said, well, that's not really what I meant, because what I was saying is you shouldn't try to do this fine-tuning, who's top, who's second. That's ridiculous. But you can make really big comparisons. Really, we've done very badly. And I tweeted out saying, please don't use this article to claim we can't make any comparisons yet. My one viral tweet, 10,000 retweets. So it just shows how to go viral is just to make some comment to the Prime Minister. And then I got quoted by Keir Starmer the week after. So at that point, I thought, time to have a lower the profile. This is not what I want to be doing. Okay, so this can happen, and I've been trying to avoid that kind of thing ever since. Some attempts at communication. Right, I wrote some time ago about, I felt a useful analogy to communicate COVID risk was in terms of normal risk, the risks we all face. And I think I've failed in that dismally, but never mind, I kept on trying. This is, I find this fascinating. In the first wave, what are the death rates in the population, i.e. the chance of both catching it and then dying? I think, these are quite extraordinary. On the right are the graphs on the normal scale. These are just the death rates per 100,000 for all the different age groups in the first wave, the first 16 weeks. And this is an exponential growth. In other words, the death rates increase exponentially with how old you are. So that's why on the left I've done a logarithmic scale, which straightens the lines out and it then enables you to see the line is staggeringly straight. That's not smooth. That is the raw data. Unbelievable. I don't think there's anything like that. COVID it hates old people and it loves young people. It doesn't love them, but it for every year you're older, between 10 and 90, 95, the risk is going up by about 12%. So it's doubling about every 5 to 6 years. There's a 10,000-fold difference in lethal risk between those two groups that they're exposed to. So it really is quite extraordinary. So those over 50, the dashed lines are the normal risk we face from our daily lives, which also increase exponentially, of course. Our risk of dying from something else increases at not quite that rate, but almost at that rate for every year. So over that first wave, the first 16 weeks, it was as everyone was exposed to about 5 extra weeks of normal life. Essentially, everyone's relative risk was roughly the same, although once you're above 50, young people were even more protected than normal. Okay, so what about the chance of dying if you catch it, which is a different thing? This is essentially depends on your vulnerability. It's nothing to do with your behavior or exposure. It's to do with your vulnerability if you catch it. All right, back in March, the Imperial Group, based on data from China and the Diamond Princess cruise ship and things like that, made those estimates. Which I actually, for the whole age range, which are pretty impressive. And somebody suggested to me on Twitter, well, how does that compare with normal risk? And you plot it, and it's almost dead on. And so back in March, I was saying, well, it looks like if you catch COVID, it's like getting a year's worth of risk crammed into about 3 weeks. So I said that the risk, if you caught COVID, was similar to the risk of dying this year from other causes. This was misinterpreted. I don't know. No, I thought that was clear. No. Katie Hopkins, bless her, before she was banned from Twitter, she had 1 million followers, and she said, fact-based tweet, corona deaths are not outpacing what is normal or usual. Sir David Spiegelhalter of the University of Cambridge says it's not adding to your risk. And that's partly because the BBC took my graph, which is nice, and redrew it, and what it showed is how people interpreted it is that the risk of dying if you get COVID was the same as the risk of dying this year. Therefore, it didn't increase it. No, it doubles it. Here's 1 apple, here's a 2 apple. They're the same, but you got 2 apples. Doesn't mean it's exactly the same apple. So so the sun, your risk of dying is no different this year, despite coronavirus pandemic, says expert. It's me. I thought, no, it's the last thing I said. It's completely wrong. You may have noticed point 14 on our list was complain. So I complained loudly and got the headline changed. I don't think it's much better, to be honest. Yeah, but anyway, I did get it changed rapidly. I've done a lot of complaining. So what about the chance of dying if you catch it? The latest estimate from the same team in October, based on 200,000 deaths, I think it was, from 11 countries, is exactly the same. The risk of dying if you catch coronavirus is roughly the same as your risk of dying in the next year. Coronavirus just any risk you've got coronavirus just multiplies it up. Any vulnerability you've got, it just multiplies it up. It's a constant relative risk. But of course, that means that in terms of absolute risk, if you're a child with very low risk, doubling it, well, who cares? If you're an old person, doubling your annual risk is really serious. So the relative risk, coronavirus has got a fixed relative risk. Okay, here's one. I've got to put some examples of, people misusing data, misinformation. I mean, I love data, but you got, dear Toby Young last year had a lovely example. There's a great tweet, and I grabbed it before it was deleted. That's you see some bad tweet, grab it quick, because they'll get deleted. New studies suggest more than 5 million Britons have had the coronavirus. Given that 50,000 people have died from it, that means it has an infection fatality rate, which is what I was just showing, of less than 0.1%. That's roughly the same as seasonal flu. Okay, if it had an IFR of 0.1%, he'd be right. It is roughly the same as seasonal flu. Unfortunately, 50,000 divided by 5 million is not 0.1%, it's 1%. So he got it completely wrong. He just, ruined his own story by just not being able to do the sums. So I think a little bit of numeracy is enormously valuable. Anyway, I'm going to go on to slightly more broad, just to finish off, go to slightly more broader ideas of trust. Because we get asked about this a lot, and whenever the word trust comes up, all you have to do is go to Honora Neal, who did the Reith lectures on trust years ago, wrote a little book, wonderful, my most thumbed book, I think. She's lovely, a philosopher of Kant. Look at her YouTube video, her TED Talk. Her TED Talk is just fantastic, about 9 minutes of jokes and Kant and everything like that. She's great. Okay, a couple of points from her. She's got this lovely idea that we shouldn't try to be trusted. Organizations should not be aiming to be trusted, to increase trust. Now, remember Kant, I mean, I've never read any Kant, but I do, I read the children's version, which says that he works on duty ethics. You work on what you have a duty to do. And she says you have a duty to demonstrate trustworthiness. So you have to earn that trust by demonstrating trustworthiness. The aim is not to be trusted, it's to be trustworthy. Brilliant. It switches the whole responsibility back to you to be trustworthy. She's had a huge influence. The Code of Practice of Statistics, which is perhaps not the most exciting document, but one I wholeheartedly support, of course I would say that, puts trustworthiness as its central pillar, or its first pillar for statistics. They've got to be trustworthy. Okay, so part of demonstrating trustworthiness is admitting uncertainty about what we know. So I've become, and my team, not my team, but people I work with, completely obsessed with communicating uncertainty and being honest about what we don't know. We don't know. We don't know. So the easy way is when you've got a number, perhaps, and you can put a range around it. But then you've got to make sure that range is fairly reliable as well. And to us, we're focusing more and more in this business, the importance of communicating the quality of the evidence. Just how much do you understand? Having that humility, that essential humility to admit that you don't fully understand what's going on. You can't even put a number on it. You don't understand. Deeper uncertainty. So I think this is an example of quite nice. Every week or so, every week, I think they update the R number, and there's 8 teams in the UK all modeling what is the R number currently in the UK. And this is from a little while back when it was greater than 1, back in November. And so there's the 8 teams, and the 8 little bars on the left are those 8 different teams doing the estimates. And the estimate R, they're all estimating the same quantity, and they're using basically the same data, and they come up with completely different answers. Isn't that cool? I mean, look, the intervals don't even overlap most of the time, so that they can't all be right. So those intervals must be too narrow. Why is that? It's because the intervals are model-based, and the models are wrong. All models are wrong, but some are useful, in the words of George Box. So those intervals are too narrow, or at least some of them are, because they, by definition, they can't, they should not, they should overlap. So I think that's a really great lesson. And in the end, they all get together and they cook up an interval, which is quite reasonable, between themselves, as a consensus, which then gets reported. But it's very good of them, I think, that they report the individual estimates because it shows the variation. And so that shows, I mean, the great thing of having 8 teams. What if there was only one team? So I think that, that's actually good science, but it does show how cautious we should be about even accepting an interval on a number. So I'm a big fan of actually saying what you don't know. And I'd just like to point to some work on that. The UK What Works centres would have got sort of star ratings for quality of evidence. So the one in education, the Education Endowment Foundation, has got a toolkit where it puts up all sorts of different interventions that school teachers can do. And on the right is the number of months they estimate this might increase the educational development of the class. But then they've got a little pound sign. This is like TripAdvisor. Got a little pound thing say how expensive it is. But the padlocks say how good the evidence is. So if we look at aspiration interventions, we see, well, it looks like it's quite expensive, doesn't seem to work, and the evidence is rubbish anyway. But collaborative learning, it looks like it's got a reasonable effect, it's quite cheap, and there's good evidence. So well, where's the choice then? The other group I'd like to point to is what SAGE do. And SAGE have taken on exactly the same idea. And also everybody has. IPCC do this for climate change, NICE do this for health. There's a whole grade system. And SAGE have got a 5-point system for the quality of the underlying evidence. So everything's labeled as either low to moderate to high, or high confidence in the underlying science and the estimation that they're doing. So they'll say, do you have to wear a face covering outdoors? Well, they think it's got very low. They've got high confidence that there's very low impacts. There's no point in doing that. Which is one of the best things that's been done in this country is they haven't been stupid enough to say, oh, we should be wearing face coverings outdoors, whereas other places have. Whereas closure of places of worship, they say, well, it might reduce our bit up to 0.1, but we don't really know, and only moderate confidence in that. We're not going to have much effect. So I think this is pretty powerful stuff. Can I just point to a paper that we've written in Nature, freely downloadable? I think it's rather cool. It's kind of manifesto. Everyone loves lists. So these are our rules for what we call trustworthy evidence communication. And this is what we try to live up to in the work we do, say on communicating the risks of vaccines or whatever. That we're trying to inform and not persuade. We're not trying to tell people what to do. We're just trying to enable them to make better decisions. We want to balance the potential risks and benefits, harms and benefits of everything, but not false balance. If the balance is like that, you don't try to pretend it's like that. You've got to be upfront about uncertainties, and that includes saying when you just don't know, when the evidence is very poor. And the other thing related to next week's talk, of course, is to counter misinformation. We take a very aggressive view to that. Get in there hard, pre-bunk it, preempt it, inoculate people against fake news. Get in there, counter the misinformation hard and early. So that's our approach on that. So to conclude, data literacy is absolutely vital in modern life, and the COVID crisis has made this even clearer. And I suppose I'd like to say that I think I'm a statistician, I'm not a modeler, not a public health person, and I think statisticians have done pretty well trying to be helpful with the media and trying not to have strong agendas. So just finally, before I finish, just a warning, if you get involved with the media, be careful what you say. Be careful about jokes, although I am quite proud of this one. In December, I was on the Today programme discussing possible Christmas rules. And I said, quite right, the raised voices can spread the virus. We know about the problems in choirs and so on. So I said, well, maybe they'll ban singing. My choir, we actually did do carols, but we were all outside with masks 6 feet apart, which made it quite difficult to hear the harmonies. So I said, oh, well, maybe it'd be a good idea. Maybe they're going to have to ban family arguments over the Christmas table. This is when we still had the prospect of actually having a proper Christmas. And this was a joke, but within an hour, there it was in the Daily Express. Families could be banned from arguing to prevent COVID spread, according to a leading British statistician. And that, I thought, yes, that's a success. That was, for me, one of my greatest achievements of the pandemic. And with that, I'm going to stop and hope that I can go back to a screen and lose my slides. And did that all work?
That did work. And it was fantastic. If you could see the chat on Twitch of all the people appreciating just how well that worked and how great that talk was. It was
brilliant.
really fantastic.
I mean, that's the problem with you can't see the audience, because, if you've got a live audience, there's people nod. There's always somebody falls asleep, but there's usually people nodding and people laugh at the jokes and things. So I do miss that quite a lot. Yeah.
Well, hopefully, at least when it comes to Q&A, I'll be able to be the proxy audience, laughing and oohing and ahhing at all of the fantastic things.
You've got to do it for everyone, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for that really fantastic talk, David. And we're going to have a 15-minute break now, so everyone be sure to use that time to grab yourself a drink if that's what you want to do, have a comfort break, and also check out all the questions that are being asked. You can see the link in the chat there. Ask your question, and we'll put them to David in the second half. But we'll have a break, so it is 25 to now. We'll come back at 10 to 8 for all of your questions for David Spiegelhalter.
Cool.
Hey everybody, to Skeptics in the Pub online for our Q&A with tonight's speaker. I hope you all had a chance to get yourself a drink and make yourself comfortable, because we've got some fantastic questions already in. So I'm just going to dive right into these questions, in fact. So we'll ask the first one, which is from Paul, aka Picticule, who asks, given the public's generally low level of statistical literacy, do you have any specific suggestions on how to improve this?
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's such a general question. I mean, I think I would hope that over the last year, the general level, I mean, I haven't got any evidence for this at all, of course, but I mean, who needs evidence? I hope has improved. I mean, I've never people been bombarded with so many graphs and so many numbers and so many ideas, new ideas to take on. And I think, people have reacted very well to it. They've taken a lot of interest. There's a real appetite for this stuff. And which, of course, is why we're writing a book, hoping to flog to the general public. I think it's very encouraging. Nobody can ever deny again that there's not a need for serious data literacy in the population and a need for, care and explaining that stuff. So I think in terms that is a sense of win. I don't know. There's lots of things you could say about how to improve it. I mean, I think that a lot of it's to do, I would say this, to do with the communication, that, real careful attention must be paid to graphs, that they're self-explanatory, that they're not manipulating people. They help people to understand. You're genuinely trying to understand things. And to be honest, the simplest things are the most important. I don't like percentages, unless I'd much rather say, out of 100 people who get infected, this many will die, or this many percentage will die, rather than talking about the percentage risk from COVID. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean if you catch it, or in the general population? So to always define what the group that you're talking about, and do it in terms of 100 people. Don't talk about chance, probability. Even percentages are sort of all right, but much better just say out of 100 people who get a positive test, how many actually have the disease, et cetera, et cetera. So those very simple ideas have been shown to be incredibly important, and which we've been trying to demonstrate in our work. For example, communicating the risks of blood clots with the AstraZeneca vaccine.
Mm-hmm. What would you say? This is a question from Dave J. He says, what would you say is the most egregious misuse of statistics that you've seen, I guess, across the pandemic, really?
Oh, that's great. I don't know. Well, I mean, there's been some awful stuff in the briefings by the politicians, which I have tried to have a go at. What I call number theatre. We've done 370,623 tests and all this sort of stuff. When a lot of them have just been posted out to people and hadn't come back, and quoting, and there have been this many 10,000 blah 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 deaths when there hadn't been. We've seen the number of deaths has not been the correct number, and so on. So spouting out big numbers, to great detail when they were just wrong. That has really irritated me. The perpetual use of the media for the daily reported deaths, as if that's the number of people who died in the last 24 hours. For a year, they've known that it's always low on Sundays and Mondays. It's high on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, roughly reliable. And they still continue to misreport it. It just is really upsetting. Actually, the best one, though, the absolute cracker was not in this country, it was in America. The Steve Hahn, the head of the FDA, he was talking about the effect of convalescent plasma, which has been shown in randomized trials not to be, a great benefit anyway. And he was claiming, the data we got shows that, there'll be 35% out of 100 people with COVID, serious COVID, 35 fewer would die. So what? There's not that many who die in the first place. How can you reduce it by 35? What he was meant to say is that it's a 35% relative reduction, which means out of 100 people who would normally die of COVID,
right,
35 fewer would die. And he didn't say, for a start, that's not right, because it was based on selected evidence, and that's just not true. But even if it were true, he expressed it completely wrongly. So he tried to do the 100 people bit, but got the wrong denominator. And that's the whole point of, as I said before, the most important thing of all is to say what the denominator is. Just say, what group are you talking about? So he tried that, he learned the lesson and got it hopelessly wrong. So that was the classic one. And of course, he had Donald Trump standing right next to him as well. So.
Well, that brings us very neatly on to the next question from Shuntz, talking about the international responses, the international figures around COVID. Which countries have had the most accurate COVID data, would you say, and which countries are out there? Well, Shuntz says an absolute horror show. So which I think we've done pretty well, in fact. I mean, as I said, there's probably 6 different definitions of a COVID death, but that's quite right, because there's no correct answer of what a COVID death. Belgium is very generous about labeling things as COVID deaths. Even as it's suspected and they haven't got a test, they go in as COVID deaths. So Belgium's always at very high rates. Other countries, they have to die in hospital and they have to be tested. Hungary and things, they've got very few. So Turkmenistan and North Korea haven't had a single one, which I think is extremely impressive. So that we have a lot to learn.
yeah, and totally unbelievable. We've done. I have to say, I think our stats are extremely good. And they come with the qualifications. None of them are perfect, and some have got delays. Again, I would say that would. I'm the wrong person to ask. I'm biased, but I think we've actually done our best in this country to be clear about what's going on. But in the end, I wouldn't want to compare numbers of deaths from COVID or something. In the end, I'd just look at excess deaths. Just count terrible things like count the bodies, and that's it. Yeah.
Well, we had a follow-up question to that from Igor in Russia, who says, what do you think of the international reporting? Do you find information from, let's say, hypothetically, Russia? Do you find that to be trustworthy?
That's getting on very delicate. I'm not going to say a word. I've already have been rude about Turkmenistan and North Korea. I'm not going to say a word about other people's statistics.
Okay, I think that's probably fair. And we had Elliot Higgins.
Even for Western European countries, I still don't particularly take that much notice of the number of COVID deaths. In the end, I'd want to look at excess deaths, but that assumes, and I believe in Russia, there's rather a lot more excess deaths than are labeled as COVID deaths. So that's all I'm going to say. But that assumes good death registrations, and that's a real problem, say, in Africa, where and other countries which have not good registration systems, where you can't even properly count how many people have died. But in the end, that I feel is the most reliable way to compare countries. Again, of course, then you've got to adjust for age, the age structure, and so on as well.
Speaking of other countries, we've got a question, from somebody who's set their name to Where Did Marsh's hair go? I'll just say over-enthusiastic barber. He hadn't been cutting hair for a while. He got overexcited. But anyway, the question is, given the low flu rates, would you advocate that people do what they do in Japan, etc., where they put on masks if they might have a cold to avoid infecting others? Is this something we should be doing?
It's very interesting. I did mention that given the fact that the measures we're taking, which are very extreme, we wouldn't want to do this every winter, for heaven's sakes, but have prevented, thousands, possibly tens of thousands of deaths over this winter. It does make, I wonder whether there will in the future, since we've sort of realized that people are willing to do things, whether there will be some measures that will be recommended in the future to try to prevent the spread of flu. And flu is so much less infectious. As I said, R of 1.3, 1.4. You don't have to do that much to slow it down. And so I wonder whether that could be, in fact, a beneficial side effect of this whole business, that in the future we'll be so much more aware of spreading infectious diseases to vulnerable people that we might be changing our behavior, even not just to prevent COVID, but prevent the spread of infectious diseases. I don't know. It's going to be very interesting to see.
Mm. And we've got a question here about Grimbeard, and it's about the points you put up about talking to the media, which I thought were excellent and just great advice for anybody who talks to the media, statisticians or otherwise. Just absolutely fantastic advice. But the question from Grimbeard is, how do you balance the good advice to avoid unwarranted certainty with the general skeptics tool of look out for weasel words like may and could and other kind of terms in that kind of way that lead you to
I think that's a very good point, because you can't just appear, too wishy-washy of things. No, we talk about confident uncertainty, muscular uncertainty. I'm uncertain. What are you going to do about it? No, you don't. It's not namby-pamby uncertainty. No, this is serious uncertainty. This is serious, confident humility. But there is this. I take all my inspiration from these people like Honora O'Neill and John Krebs. If you remember back with, he was head of the Food Standards Agency when they went through chaos and disaster of foot and mouth and scrapie and BSE and Sudan red. It's just complete mess. One crisis and disaster after another. And he developed a real good process. He was always up there talking to the media, and he's got a process that I now tick off when I'm watching anyone dealing with the crisis. First of all, you say what you do know. So, we know this. Then you say what you don't know. Absolutely upfront what you don't know. And then you say what you're doing about it to find out more. And then you say self-efficacy. What can people do now? If to be on the safe side, don't eat lamb. If you don't want to do this, don't do it. And then the crucial thing is say, but I'm going to come back to you, and what I say will change. My advice will change as we learn more. Chris Whitty, you watch him, he ticks those off. I don't have the same script as I have, but if I was doing that, thank heavens I'm not, but if I was standing up here, I would be working through that script. And Chris is very good at it. He does that. He's very open right from the beginning about we don't know so much. In the meantime, you can do this. I don't think they've never been clear enough about, but we'll change our advice. And so, they got face masks wrong at the beginning. There's far too much obsession with cleaning things and sanitizing and surfaces and even washing hands or whatever, which I'm sure helps, but it's nothing like as important as aerosols and ventilation indoors and face masks. And so they got that wrong, I think. And but there was kind of and WHO did as well. There was some overconfidence about the limitations of face masks. It's just that the evidence wasn't very good then, and not so much was understood about the transmission of the virus. So again, you can be, you're absolutely right. You've got to be able to be, instance, have that humility, have that uncertainty, and yet be confident in how you're acting and what you're saying. But that part of that confidence is to say things will change. Will change.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, the idea of the confidence, because we see a lot of people who are spreading a lot of misinformation about COVID. And I think one of the things that draws people to that misinformation is the confidence with which it's asserted.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a perennial problem about, will people listen to you and trust you if you admit uncertainty and say you don't know? So we're actively researching that, doing randomized trials on the public of different ways of presenting the information with and without uncertainty. And all our experiments show that if you are upfront about the uncertainty, the trust in the source does not decline. Even for, you might expect that from very numerate scientific people, but even in general, if you can be, in a sense, just say, yep, this is, especially if you can put a range on your estimates, something like that, no reduction in the trust in the source. And so, but people do realize that the actual information is less certain. So it's not that they just ignore it. And I find this really encouraging in that it's always thought, oh, well, unless I'm really confident, no one's taking any notice of me. No, this is not, the evidence does not point to this at all. And I suppose I again take, I suppose, rather an ethical view on this, following Honora Neal. It's deeply untrustworthy to be more confident than you actually feel.
Yeah.
The only time you might want to do that, I suppose, is an absolute emergency when you want people to evacuate because the volcano's about to blow up. Even if you're not convinced it's going to blow up, it might be better to tell people get them off Mount St. Helens.
Unless you develop a reputation as the boy who cried volcano, in which case you
can't do it many times, but once in a while it might be worth doing that. But that's a very particular situation.
Yeah. We have a question that follows on from that quite well from someone who's put their name as Trust Me, Please. And they've asked, you made a great point about not seeking trust, but instead proving trustworthiness.
Yeah.
How do you know when you've achieved that, and how do you measure it?
That's incredibly important thing, because you kind of think, well, how do I know if I've achieved that? I measure whether people trust me. Yeah, but I'm not trying to get people to trust me. So the first thing is, and this is I suppose the Kantian idea, it is an end in itself. It is not what's the word? Not an operational or pragmatic. When you're just trying to do something in order to achieve a purpose, there's a word for this, which I don't know.
Oh, yeah. Is it utilitarian? No?
Utilitarian, I suppose. It's a very non-utilitarian perspective. Kant is not. It's to do with duty. So first of all, you don't have to, in a way, empirically test it. You have to just decide your principles and then try to demonstrate them. And that's it. So you can, we're developing checklists. We're working with people on this. People are really grabbing hold of this and saying, but the problem is they do tend to move towards, well, are people then trusting us more? So no, that's not the point. That's not the point. No, I know. No, you just have to do it. And maybe they will and maybe they won't. You just have to do it. But that's quite difficult to push. I mean, it would be nice, of course, if people trusted the trustworthy and didn't trust the untrustworthy. Wouldn't that be cool? But the next moment, if you really focus on that, operationalizing it, the next thing you're trying to think, well, how can you get people to trust us? And then you've lost it. You've completely destroyed the whole point of the argument once you think of pragmatic ways to get people to trust us. So it is, I completely agree. It's a really tricky issue. But in the end, and maybe I'm being idealistic, but I do think we should work from principles.
Yeah. I've got a question here from David, who asks, do you find it difficult to communicate without persuading? And if you have an opinion, how do you avoid trying to put that across?
I mean, I cannot tell you how often our team who works on this stuff argue amongst ourselves about when do you tip that balance between informing and persuading? And we argue about this all the time, but my personal thing is, persuasion is when you want to try to get people to do something. It's okay if you want people to persuade people to engage with the problem. In other words, and you do that by being vivid and interesting. I would say there's no point in being trustworthy if you're dull. You do that by telling good stories, by being vivid, by things. But you have to try to make sure you're doing that and not pushing someone in one direction or another. So in that sense, you do have to think about your objectives, and your objectives your success is not to make somebody think or do one thing or another. It's to make, but I think a reasonable objective is at least to make them engage, to use a cliche, to empower them to actually engage with the issue and think about it. A lot of this is actually to do with, we're back to the Danny Kahneman thinking fast and slow. A lot of it's to do with saying, don't just go with your guts and what you heard yesterday is the latest thing, or what you came in on the social media. Just stop a moment and actually try to weigh things up a bit. We're going to try to help you to weigh things up. It won't be perfect. We're going to do that. And I actually think this is quite an honourable thing to try to do. But as I said, we think about this all the time. But the way to think about it is, how do I measure success? And if your success is merely that people engage and feel that they have taken some control over the decisions they're making and the opinions they have, that's success. Regardless of what they end up doing.
Yeah, yeah. I think this next question from I'm not sure if it's the same David or another David, but I think this is a good sort of follow on from there. David asks, could many of the non-COVID deaths be people who died of other causes because healthcare was disrupted, which is one of the things we've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that is so interesting. It's enormous importance, and certainly in the first wave, when hospitals just shut down, essentially, that could have been the case. Where we would know that perhaps is that there would be an increase in the death rates from from cancers and things like that. There's no sign of that happening yet. Now, it's not saying it won't happen, but so far there really, it doesn't look as if the healthcare disruption is causing, there's no sign of it, because the non-COVID deaths are running at record lows. If the undoubtedly delays and disruption of cancer services over the whole of the last year, but you might not expect that to start showing up in the mortality stats yet. Much later, we wouldn't perhaps see that yet. So far, we're seeing no sign of that, which is very encouraging. But of course, also, the massive disruption to children's education caused by the measures, the increase, the stress and the strain and the mental health problems undoubtedly there don't show up in these stats yet.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, as a follow-on from that, I spend a lot of time talking to people who are very anti all lockdown measures, very anti all kind of and some even who don't believe that COVID's a real thing. I spend a lot of time having very interesting conversations. But one of the things that comes up a couple of times is that many of the deaths that we're seeing are due to things like suicide because of the mental health issues, because of the restrictions. Is there any data on that? I think there was some work done to look at it.
No evidence on that. No, there's no. We haven't got the latest suicide data out, but there's an increase in the number of calls to helplines and things, but no evidence for that. In fact, there's caused a reduction in road accidents. There's been over the whole pandemic, there's been a net saving in lives of young people. Fewer have died than normal because they haven't gone out and got killed, to put it brutally. And so there's, you could say the measures have been for the young there's been a net benefit. So, on that metric anyway. Yeah. So no, this has not happened. These people, you could just that picture, just that ONS picture. These are deaths because of COVID. They're all this bit above the black line is because of COVID. They have died because of this virus. It's triggered. Now, it will pick on the vulnerable. Nearly everyone who dies from COVID has got something else wrong with them. But that's that graph I showed, that what COVID does is take any vulnerability you've got and pump it up.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you haven't got it, if you're healthy, then it may get you, but pretty unlikely. But any vulnerability, it pumps it up. It's a really nasty thing. Any weakness you've got, it finds and it exaggerates it. So that means that everyone's got the same relative risk, essentially.
Yeah, yeah. In terms of the various sort of stats that we've seen a lot of people who've got anti-mainstream views on COVID trying to find stats to back up their point of view. Stu here asks, is it possible that by providing lots of data, you might be inadvertently feeding the misinformation machine because there's more things to find? Absolutely.
Got it. That's just what you got to do. Sorry, no, I just let 1,000 flowers, bloom. I really think you can. The whole point about openness and transparency in data is that it will be misused. No, get it out there. So I do think that you have to try to get the raw data out there, and in the end, that will be a good thing. I may be optimistic, but when you produce any analyses, then I think it is important to make clear about, in a way, what this does not show. If you notice the ONS graphs I was putting up, ONS have got, just over the last year, got hugely more sophisticated in their graphical presentations. Three things point to they're doing. They're using the most place of deaths ones, using small multiples. A lot of scattering multiple graphs around because the eye is fantastically good at spotting the difference. So use small multiples. The titles contain the interpretation. The title of those graphs say what is the main message from the graph, which is a really powerful bit of communication, I think. And then there's labels actually on the graph with arrows pointing at it, saying, don't take any notice of this. This is because of bank holidays and things like that. Warnings on the graph. And God, these are all good things, and we're learning this so much that our new idea, which I feel is that on the graph should contain within it an explanation of why the graph is inadequate.
Okay.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
So if you put a graph, you should put on the graph what isn't in the graph. So that's it's not the uncertainty about what's there. If you can put that on, that's good. Error bars and blurs and things like that. But my new thing I'm really pushing, I'm trying to push, is that the graph should also say not included in this graph are measures of X, Y, and Z. So, for example, if you look at the vaccine, when we've been producing these graphs which balance for the AstraZeneca vaccine the risks of, if you don't take the vaccine, of or how many ICU visits the vaccine is preventing, really serious events, but how many of these nasty blood clots, it might be causing. So there is a balance. Events are roughly similar magnitudes. And so we can think of that as balancing the potential benefits against the potential harms. But of course, there's loads more potential benefits of vaccination. Primarily the fact that you're helping other people because you won't be transmitting it in the same way. So you're helping the whole community. And there's other harms, most of them not so serious, but short-term harms of the vaccination. So any graph we produce is always inadequate. And so I think that part of the humility that I'm arguing for is that when we draw a nice graph, especially if it's very good and sexy and popular, we should have in there inseparable, it mustn't be in the legend, it's got to be on the graph.
Yeah.
Say, this graph does not include blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. We've got an anonymous question, which I think picks up from there quite well. So this anonymous question asks, humans inevitably overemphasize intentional actions, from vaccines to trolley problems. Yeah. So when we communicate risk, are we obligated to remind them of those biases so that people try and take into account?
It's well, I've gotten a lot of trouble with this risk business because, let's say for younger people, if you take the AstraZeneca vaccine, there's 1 in 100,000 chance you'll get a really nasty clot, maybe slightly more now. Thought now. So everyone, all the media asked me and others last week, what other things got a 1 in 100,000 chance? But that's about the chance you'll die if you do a skydive. But not everyone chooses to do a skydive. It's the chance of guessing the last five digits of someone's phone number. There's all sorts of things that have got that chance. But in order to be resonant with people, they've got to, you kind of feel it, you're right, it's got to have the same level of intention that this is an active movement. And so you could say, well, that's the chance in a week of getting a blood clot from taking the contraceptive pill. And not as serious a blood clot. So that's an intentional action. I wonder, I take statins every day, and I think statins are actually remarkably similar to a vaccine because it's something that I take voluntarily. I'll never know whether it does me any good or not. I don't want it to have side effects because I'm taking it all the time. Instead of a one-off, it's every day. And so, in a way, that's got a rather similar thing. It's an intention I do in order to prevent future illness while I'm healthy. It's not to cure. It's not to treat an illness. It's to prevent one. It's very similar, I think, and I'm quite slightly surprised people have made more analogy between vaccines and statins because they follow. But the major difference is that I take a statin for my own benefit.
Yeah,
anyone's vaccinated for their own benefit, but for young people, it's as much, if not more, for the benefit of everyone around them.
Yeah.
The story when I was asked about this on the radio, I said, well, 1 in 100,000, 1 in 90,000. That's the whole of Wembley Stadium. So you fill the Wembley Stadium full up with 20 people in their 20s. You vaccinate them all. One might have a serious event. But just think of, if those number of people are vaccinated, how much that will benefit the community. And I think that's quite a powerful image that is quite useful.
Yeah, it's funny you say about the statin thing. I wonder if some of the comparison to statins weren't made because the newspapers have had a lot of fun over the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, I was slightly reluctant to do it because if I started pointing out the unbelievably rare, there must be. I haven't checked. There must be some. I was going to look at if you ever take any pills, never open up the leaflet inside the box because it's that long. And you look down the list because they always say common side effects. They're called common. Anything between 1% and 10% is called common. So it only happens in 1 in 100 times. It's called common because that's the rule. It's got to be called common. That's not what common means to me, but that's what's true. So you get down to the ones that are less than 1 in 10,000, and we're talking about a lot less than that, and you get some really nasty stuff. So as I said, never read the patient information leaflet, but we put up with these things.
There's another anonymous question here, which I think is quite interesting. You've called out the government for number theatre during the push to report increase in test numbers, that kind of thing. Yeah. Do you think that criticism has actually had an effect at all?
I think they've got better. I don't know what everyone else feels, but I thought I just couldn't watch the briefings back a year ago in April and May. They were so awful. I think they've got a lot better. I would say that there's been a lot more input on the graphs have got better, a lot more statistical input on the graphs. But the best ones of all are when the politicians aren't there. When occasionally you get them which are just with Jonathan Van Tam, who's a great communicator, and other ones. For example, the one on the COVID, on the AstraZeneca vaccine, was just MHRA and JCVI and Jonathan Van Tam, and it is a completely different tone. They talk to the audience as if they're sensible people and can take it as it is, and they're not trying to jolly them along or frighten them. They just tell it how it is, and come over as immensely trustworthy. So I think that's what they are. And so I do think that, something I said for ages, that if only they could split away. So obviously sometimes you've got to have Boris flanked by Patrick and Chris Whitty, but really, I just wish, which is what I said a year ago, they could do it on their own and just present all the stats and all the data and all the evidence as a totally separate thing and be in control of it. Yeah. And they have got better. No, it has got hugely better. Yeah.
And this I think might be the last question, but we've got a question from Mel, who asks, do you think your profile and that of stats nerds during COVID has done a great PR job for recruiting the next generation of stats nerds and data scientists?
Oh, I do hope so. God, that would make it the one good thing that could come out of this whole shambles would be if more young people wanted to become statisticians, data scientists, just become data literate, just become more informed. And again, I've got no evidence whether that's the case or not, whether there's going to be a sort of, people talk about the Brian Cox effect on physics and things like that. I'd love to feel that this was generating, huge public interest in data science and stats, and realize that this is open to everybody. It's certainly not just for, the nerd thing, I'm a nerd, I suppose, but I always think, oh, God, that's going to encourage people just to think it's sort of, old men with thick glasses and things. And so this is not, I love the fact that in the Royal Statistical Society now, the majority of younger members of the Royal Statistical Society are women now, which is great, which is wonderful. But it's not only young people coming into it. I've been part of, I went to number 10 to film a data science masterclass being promoted by Michael Gove and others, and being taken on by senior civil servants throughout the government. And this is really exciting times. Number 10 has got his own data science unit. Boris Johnson's got dashboards on his desk now. This is extraordinary developments that have happened, and I think they've happened because of this crisis, with probably a certain input from a certain D. Cummings, but never mind. Yes.
Well, if there is a massive rush towards people becoming data scientists, then I guess you guys are in the very perfect position to track that over the coming years and figure out just how popular it all becomes. Yeah. David, thank you so much for this fantastic Q&A, a really fantastic talk. I'm positive all of the audience have enjoyed this just as much as I have. It's been really fascinating talking to you, and thank you so much for the great work that you're doing.
Okay, no, thanks very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed. Okay.
And everyone else, remember, we're doing these talks every single week. Next week, we've got Mariana Spring from the BBC talking about her first year on the front line of tracking conspiracy theorists and various disinformation campaigns across social media and the wider internet. So that's going to be a really fascinating talk. That's right here at twitch.tv/SITP at 7 p.m. Next week, UK time. If you've enjoyed this and you want to make a small donation to what we do, you can go to sitp.online/donate to throw in a couple of quid and help keep the lights on. And if you've really enjoyed this and you want to hang around and chat to us, lots of us will be in our Zoom pub immediately after this finishes. And you can see the link to join the Lock-ins Razor Zoom pub will be posted in the chat, and you can all join us there and have a drink, have a chat, and speak to other people in the community. So otherwise, I hope you've all enjoyed this as much as I have, and we'll see you all next week.